Agotivach, this is Gemara in Zevachim, Daf Yud Dalid. And as we begin a new year, we like to dedicate the Zchus HaTorah, incredible Zchus Talmud Torah B'Ravim, as a Zchus Refuah Shlema for Gabriel Simcha, B'Miriam Ahuva, the ultimate Koyach HaTorah, should bring incredible Refuahs B'Siyata D'Shemaya. As well as, I know that we've not been back up to being a full day ahead. Hopefully in the coming days, we'll get back on schedule, that the shirim will be up plenty of time in advance, especially with all the Yom Tovim on the horizon. But for now, we're about 12 lines to the bottom. The first one line is Maitzi. At the end of the line, Amar Avmari Afana Nami Taninai, as well learned in a Mishnah, a Raya. Continuing, picking up where we left off, which is that the dipping of the finger of the Kohen Gadol, inappropriate thoughts at that moment, thoughts of pigol, thoughts of shaloi bizmanoi, of being makar of the carbon at the wrong time, can make a chatas penimi pigol. Says the Mishnah Zaklal, kol ha-kaimetz v'noisin b'kli. Anyone who takes a kaimetz, again, a kaimetz is referring to flour, referring to the kmitza, referring to the three fingers that one takes. Says the Mishnah, anyone who does a kmitza, puts it in a kli, v'ha-moilech v'ha-maktir, and the one that carries it, the one that burns it, and all these different avoidais, if he has the wrong kavana, it creates pegel. Says the Gemara. So b'shlama kaimetz hainu sheichet. Now we're going to see that when it comes to the mincha, when it comes to the flour, each of these avoidais parallels and mimics one of the avoidais that we find by the regular shchita, by a regular carbon. So says the Gemara, I understand the kaimetz, the taking the three fingers, that is tantamount to shchita. Moilech carrying, hainu moilech, is moilech. Maktir nami, hainu zayrik. Elen noisin toich bikli, noisin bikli, maimihu. What avoida is placing the flour inside the kli? So Elam did tell me like Kabbalah, you're going to tell me it's similar to catching the blood. There's a very simple difference. By Kabbalah, it happens on its own. You shech the animal, and the blood flows forth on its own. So says the Gemara, the element that it's memela differs from the fact over here, where after you take with your three fingers, you have to place it down. Virami. Ayuka shaka virami. Ella, rather, kima de la sagi de la yayiv. Since you're going to tell me, since you have to do it, you have to put the flour into the vessel. Al karchei avodah chashuva. That detail, the detail that requires you take the kmitza, the flour, the mincha, and put it into the kli sharis, that makes it into an avodah. If that is true, so says Ramari, here's my raya, hachanami, by us, when the kohen dips his finger into the dam, there's no other way to do it. Al karchei, hainu halacha, must be similar to the avodah of halacha, of carrying the blood, and therefore having the wrong kavana pegel, kavana shlei bezmanai, will cause a chatas penimi to become pegel, even if it's only merely done when the kohen is dipping his finger. Says the Gemara, 5 lines from the bottom, no raya. Loi in the time of the Kabbalah. With Kamrid, you asked, by blood it happens on its own, and here you have to place it. Kivan de mata and kliyu, says the Gemara, I don't care about gravity. Lamaisa, both of them are placing it into a vessel. Mali mamela, mali kashakel. What's the difference if it happens on its own? What's the difference in mali kashakel v'yav if you place it? Says the Gemara, that won't make a difference, which really just shows us an important rule in life. It's a chilik, but is that machalik? Meaning, anytime we have two items, we can ask, A is not exactly like B, which is true, says the Gemara. But why does that make the difference? It is a chilik, it's a differentiation, but not every differentiation causes halachic differences. And that's the Gemara's teretz. Continues the Gemara, and this really is the wrap-up of this whole sugya of dipping your finger into the blood, and whether that's called an avodah that the wrong thoughts would create pigel. Says the Gemara, Lema Ketanai. It is indeed a machlokes Tanaim. The Tani Chad we learned in one brayso. Tfilas etzah mifal geles. Dipping the finger creates pigol. Bechatas hani idach lo mifal geles lo mifal geles. Doesn't create pigol. V'lo mifal geles. And it can't be any form of pigol. So says the Gemara, and if you want to know the difference between these two, not to take too much time, but Rashi 3 lines to the bottom points out, Tavel amanas lahakte murim lemachar. That's lo mifageles. What's lo mifageles? Imshach lekibel amanas litzel etzva lemachar. Different levels of the avodah. Says the Gemara, there's no pegel. So says the Gemara, these are conflicting braysos. So my love Tanai, that this is a machlokes Tanaim. Answers the Gemara the last line, Loi harabanan harav Shimon. It's not a machlokes Tanaim, but rather one is Shitas Rabbanan and one is Shitas Reb Shimon. Rav Shimon, and Shitas Reb Shimon is such that holds that Haylacha cannot create pegel. Ask the Gemara, Rav Shimon, Ayri Tfilas Etzva. I said, why is the Bryce holding in on Tfilas Etzva? Ha'amar, we learned, Rav Shimon taught us as we turn over to the top of today's daf, Daf Yudal Amud Aleph, Kol she'eino al mizbeach hachitzayin kishlamim ein by misham pegel. Anything that is not placed on the outer mizbeach like a shlamim does not have any form of pegel. So says the Gemara, why would the Brisa hone in on the detail of dipping the finger? It's many more avodas according to Rav Shimon. Rather, responds the Gemara, Ella Hava Rabbanon v'loy kasha kam v'chatzal chitzayin kam v'chatzal penimius. Says the Gemara different karbanos. Ask the Gemara, chatzal chitzayin is pshita. By a chatzal chitzayin, it's pashit like sevu v'taval. Doesn't say v'taval at all, and therefore there would be no pigel. Answers the Gemara, it's rechatzal chedish. Sal ketay dechamina hoyel v'kasav v'lakach. Since it says by the chatas chitzayin you have to take the blood, and therefore v'yasi kaif, and if a monkey would kawam rami le'ayadei and put the blood in the kain's hand, ba'i lemishkal zamane achriti, what would the kain have to do? He would have to take some blood again, and therefore command dechsev v'taval dami. Even though it only says v'lakach, but the lakicha can't happen on its own. That if a monkey would come and place it, the kohen would have to do it again, which should show us that there is a halacha of tefillah that the kohen has to actually dip his finger. Kamash malam achi like sivitaval demashma achi umashma achi. Says the Gemara, that's the chiddush. The reason it doesn't say v'taval is because it's mashma both ways. And that really wraps up the end of yesterday's shir, which is the sugya of dipping the finger and whether the machshava at that moment could create pigol or not. We continue quoting the next part of the Mishnah, which is Shitas Rabbi Shimon, the 2 dots, 10 lines down, Yudal Amud Aleph. Rav Shimon machsher behilach. Rav Shimon says that thoughts during the hilacha do not create pigol. Why, said Rav Shimon? Because halacha is not integral, it's not intrinsic. Why? Because you could have a carbon without halacha. If you shecht right next door to the mizbeach. Omar Rav Shimon ben Lakish, Maider Rabbi Shimon, by halachas chatois hapenimius, shemachshava psula behu. Rav Shimon is maskim by the chatas penimi that there will yes be pigol by the halacha. Why? For the same yisai that he said in the Mishnah, there's no pigol, which is what? He said in the Mishnah that what? There's no pigol by halacha because you don't need to do it. But the chatas penimi is you need to do it, and therefore there will be yes pigol. Ask the Gemara, V'amar Rav Shimon, Kol she'eino al mizbeach ha'chitzon kishlamim. As we quoted again, the top line of our Amid, the Rav Shimon holds that the only time there's going to be pigol is if it's an avodah, which is similarly found by the shlamim on the chatas chitzayna. So says the Gemara, l'chayr, it shouldn't apply b'chlal over here. Amar Rav Yossi Rav Chanina, ma'ida hayal lifsal mikal v'chaymer. Says Rav Yossi, no, Rav Shimon is ma'ida that it will passel by the chatas penimi, even though it's not on the mizbeach hachitzoni from a kal v'chaymer. Uma shalei lishma shachshu b'shlamim pasal v'chatas, just like shalei lishma pasals, chatzas manish pasal b'shlamim didn't shivsal b'chatas. So basically, it's kal v'chaymer. Even though Rav Shimon's general klal is in the time of mizbeach hachitzoni won't have pigol, he'll be masket the chatas penimi will. And by extension, says Reish Lakish, since the halacha by the chatas penimi is yes integral, Rav Shimon would hold that a machshava zara at that point would yes create pigul. So it comes out, if you want to have precision in Shitas Rav Shimon, you can't say he holds there's no pigul by halacha. It's not true. Depends on the carbon and the necessity of the halacha. Says the Gemara, 12 lines in the bottom, the wide lines, and first line is Vashkhan. Says the Gemara, Vashkhan chutz lizmanoi, chutz lemekaymai minal. We found that there's going to be pegol by chutz lizmanoi with regard to the chatas penimi. What about chutz lemekaymai? Imi chutz lizmanoi. Says the Gemara, you want to learn from chutz lizmanoi? I'll tell you, mal chutz lizmanoi shekin kares. The punishment is kares, so you can't learn out from there. You want to learn out from Shalei Lishma. You also can learn from there because Shalei Lishma is unique. That is noyig by a bama. So ask the Gemara, how are you going to know chutz lemekaymai by chatas penimi? Answers the Gemara, Shalei Lishma and b'may noyig. Where is Shalei Lishma noyig b'pesach v'chatos? Right? Reminiscent back to our original Mishnah. Where does Lishma passel? Again, kol zevachim. Shenizchu shalei lishman. What did our Mishnah teach us? It's kosher. It just doesn't oil for the bailim. Chutz mi pesach v'chatos. So says the Gemara, where it's shalei lishma pasol by pesach v'chatos. Pesach v'chatos b'bama loy karvu. And therefore, the fact you can't tell me that you can't learn out shalei lishma because it's not by a bama, because the whole mekar by shalei lishma is pesach v'chatos, which aren't brought in the bama in the first place. So that's going to be Makar number 1. Iba Yisema, Makar number 2 for Shleimim Kaimai by Chatas Pinimi Hekeshahu. We have a Hekesh Shlishi. It says in Torah Shizechot Lizmanoi. Torah continues Pegol Zechot Lemakaimai. And therefore, from the Hekesh, we learn out that they apply by both. Amai Rava, in Tim Salaymer of Shimon Savla Kibrei. So if Rav Shimon held like his son Rav Elazar, to Amar Bein Ulam Mizbeach Safain Ein Machshavas Ma'elos Ba'elacha, then Chatois Penimius, excuse me, Ein Machshavas Ma'elos Ba'elacha Chatois Penimius, Ella Mi Pesach Ulam V'Lifnim. So now we're going to start a whole list of Imtim Solaimers. Again, Shitas Rav Shimon is that Ha'elacha can yes have pigul, cannot have pigul, depends. If the halacha is integral, and we started off with Reish Lakish at the 2 dots teaching us, what determines seemingly if it's integral, what type of chatos is it? A regular chatos would not be integral, because you could be shachat right next to the mizbeach. But Reish Lakish said a chatos penimi, it's yes integral. Now says the Gemara, we're going to have a whole list over here, depending on different shitais within the Beis HaMikdash. Says the Gemara, we're going to see where Rav Shimon will yes apply. So says the Gemara, and particularly where pigul will apply. So says the Gemara, for Shimon holds like his son Rav Elazar, who holds between the ulam and the mizbeach, Safain is considered north. Then machshava is not going to help by even the chatas penimi only where it's necessary, which is going to be between the Pesach ulam and lifnim, from the doorway of the ulam and inward. That's because of Rav Shimon holds that the shechita can be done a little bit outside. Imtim Slam yourself like Rav Yehuda. Now continues the Gemara. If he holds like Rav Yehuda, Damar Techazara Mikadish, that inside the Azara has a level of Kedusha, and items in the Azara are sanctified, then a then El Shav is not going to help. Taking out the 2 frankincense spoons from the shulchan, Ella where because that's the only area that it's integral. So the site is always going to be that we're narrowing down each avodah where it needs to be done, and that is going to be the only place that machshava will passel pickle by the halacha. Intim Salav, and each one of these Intim Salaimars are sugyas b'fnei atzmai that we're going to get to. Intim Salav Kedusha Eichavulam Chadi, it's all one Kedusha. And in Machshav Elazal Pesach Ulam V'Chotz. It's only going to be by the doorway of the Ulam. Intim Salav Tech Pesach Chilafnim, that inside the doorway is the status of inward. In Machshav Elazal Filip Siya Achaz, even one step. El K'dei Shatas Yadeh, only the amount of handing in your hand, because that's the only area that's going to be necessary. Tim Salav Lach Shalai Beregel Leishma Lacha. Ein machshava may eles klal. So there's going to be all the different ways to limit shitas Rav Shimon. Continues the Gemara, 3 lines to the bottom. He said to them, what is the status of halacha bazar? And as yesterday we said, we're going to learn a lot of the basic yisoidais. That idea continues right now. Says the Gemara, can you do a halacha, the carrying, the transporting of the different parts of the karvan with a zar non-kain? Amrle, so Rav Chisda responded, it's ksheira. Umikra misayeni, and I have a pasuk proving me. Vayishchatu is a pasuk v'yizriku akayanim is a dami adam balaviyim avshitim. So we see in the pasuk that kayanim and laviyim are only by the shchita and only by the avshata, but by the haylacha, seemingly a kain could do it. And even more, Rashi says even one step deeper. It says vayishchatu es haPesach, vayizriku akayanim. So where is the kain critical? By the zrika, as we'll see. Shchita, believe it or not, could be done by Yisrael. Says the Gemara, seemingly the halacha is the same. Master Rav Sheisha zar v'ainan sheker ubalmon a kain, an einin, someone whose relative dies. Rachmana litzlan. Shikar, one who is drunk, as we turn over to Yedalim Beis. Balmum, someone who has a mum. What's the halacha? Says the Gemara, Bekabbalah B'Halacha B'Zrika, and all these avaydais is possible. V'chein yeshiv, v'chein small, someone sitting, someone using his left hand. Says the Gemara to Yoftas. What do we see clearly? We see it's possible by Azar. How can you tell me it's possible? Ask the Gemara. For Rav Chisda Krakamer, he had a pasuk. So how you bring me a raya? It's possible. Says the Gemara. David, Maisa, it's Taba. That when is it going to be kosher? What is the pasuk referred to that a zar can be kosher? Is when he does a Maisa like a pillar, meaning he stood in his place and he didn't move at all. So if he didn't move, then he's quote unquote part of the halacha. He's involved between the shchita and the zrika. That's why it's kosher, says the pasuk. But it's not called the halacha that would passel. Continues the Gemara 4 lines down. Rav Yesi Armi Tevayo Halacha Bazar is the machlekes Rav Shimon Rabban. Rav Shimon Damar Avodah Shev Shalvat Olav Avodah, any avodah that could be negated is not avodah. Therefore, Ksher Bazar the Rabbanan. But according to Rabbanan, it's going to be Pesula. Just like the Rabbanan arguing Rav Shimon, so too the Rabbanan are going to hold that Halacha Bazar is going to be possible. So now we're going to learn Mamish Yisaides. So it seemingly sounded like a moment ago. And avoid that's Efshel of Atala, that could be nullified, could be done by Yisrael. It's a lower level. But wait! Shchita, the acts of sacrificing, the slaughtering, of the carbon, is able to be done by a Yisrael. And yet, it's the Efshel of Atala. You need to sacrifice, you need to slaughter your animal. And yet, Ksher Bizar, if you're done by Yisrael. So responds the Gemara, fascinating Yisoid. Amar le shchita lav avoidi. Now, this is one of the difficult dichotomies. We have to split our brain mamish when it comes to karbanos. That we have something integral. Efshar levatala. You can't have the carbon without the slaughtering, the shchita. And yet, lav avoida he. It's not going to have the status of an avodah. Says Gemara, is that true? 11 lines down, the first line is Zera. Shchita is para bizar, it's psula, so why tell me it's ksheira bizar? Says Rav, if you shech the para aduma, by Yisrael it's possible. The reason is learned from a pasuk. Says Gemara, no kasha. Shiny para, the kache bedikabayisi. Para aduma is a different status. It's not a regular carbon. Has the status of kache bedikabayis, which is the status that it's the moment of the Beis Hamikdash. Says the Gemara, mamish v'lav kol dechenu. So it should be mamish even more so. Kaddish bedikabayis havi avoida. Kache mizbeach lav avoidi. Says the Gemara, how can this be? Kache bedikabayis means it has monetary value of the Beis Hamikdash. So if it has monetary value, and then it's considered an avodah so much so that a Yisrael will passel. So you're telling me kachim mizbeach, a regular carbon, is not an avodah? Amar Rav Shisha Breder Rav Idi Mididavi Amarayim Negoyim says Rav Shisha Breder Rav Idi. It's similar to Marois Mididavi Amarois Negoyim. The lav avodahi ubai kahuna. Not an avodah and needs to be a kohen. So we see the fact that something needs to be done by a kohen does not necessarily make it an avodah, and therefore the fact that para aduma needs a kohen is not going to create it to be an avodah. So we're sticking to the fact that shchita lav avodah, and it can be done by a Yisrael. Ask the Gemara smack in the middle of the Amid. The first line is he varei alachas evarim lekevesh, carrying the Ivarim to the ramp of the Mizbeach, the Avodah Shevshel Vatali, and yet it's Psula Bizarre. Answers Gemara, you're right. Or the Torah taught it to us, yeah, we're not. Says Gemara, V'lav kol dechenu. It doesn't hold back the kapara. And yet, Lechas Dam. Should certainly require the kahuna. Says the Gemara, Itmar Nami, Amar Ulam Rav Lazar Lechas Bizar Psula Vafilu LeRebi Shimon. So the Gemara concludes that this is indeed a good kasha, that Lechas Dam should be ma'akiv the kapara, that even according to the Rav Shimon, the Gemara is folding, the Gemara is agreeing that it has to be done by a kohen. We're going to stop over here, pick it up for the next Shaila, as the Gemara is going to continue asking different forms of halacha b'siyata dishmai.